Joining me with reaction, the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, Culture of Corruption, Malkin. Michelle, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, Sean.
All right, so it goes deep into, we got more evidence as if it were needed because we have failed policies, but his belief in collectivism, common good, and which fit into his governing style. But people seem still to be afraid to identify the president, you know, for this philosophy which has failed the country in his 4 years.
Yeah. Well, the video, which I think Aaron Klein should get credit for here, I think the more evidence we have, the better. And I don't agree with a lot of jaded, cynical observers out there who are turning up their noses every time one of these videos comes up. I think it's helpful. I think it's very useful. But it is certainly not a revelation, given, as you say, the present. But all of these pieces of the past are confirmation of what we know now. And they're needed to persuade people who are latecomers to the real Obama that we can't afford this in the future. And this, I think, is what the Romney campaign really needs to stitch together, that it's his radical past plus this disastrous present that is going to usher in, if people make the wrong decision, a more perilous, bankrupt, and unsafe future.
All right, but look at the last 2 weeks, how things have gone down. You have everything that happened in Benghazi. Finally, now, as we reported at the beginning of the program tonight, they admit, oh, this was a terror attack. They were telling us it was anything but, just like Fort Hood is an example of workplace violence. The same with the economy. You have 25 million underemployed Americans, 1 in 6 in poverty, 15 million more on food stamps, 49 million total. You know, you say that he's the food stamp president, you're called a racist. How do you deal with the media? And then, of course, they focus on the Romney tape, which we now find out has missing minutes. You know, how does Romney overcome what is an obvious media bias?
Well, I'll tell you how you don't deal with it. You don't listen to these Beltway and Manhattan chin pullers, these Republican strategists who we should remind people of 4 years ago were all on the Obama bandwagon and now pretend to give advice to Romney. We know what their best interest is. Their best interest at heart is their own self-propagation. So don't listen to, I'm sorry, I mean, they had their time, but the Peggy Noonans of the world and the David Brookses. David Brooks, whose best claim to fame for people who have watched him, those of us in new media over the last 4 years, is drooling over Obama's crease in his pants and talking about all of the Ivy League smarty pants who were going to change the world. We remember, and we're holding them accountable, and we discount their opinions now about what Romney should do. You look at all of the front pages of a lot of these so-called conservative websites, and they're moaning and groaning about how Romney has lost it. But out here in the heartland, outside of that bubble, people aren't paying attention to what David Corn is saying. And to the extent that the video about Romney and the so-called botch and the gaffe that he made is getting out there, I think people now, having seen the fuller context of it, know exactly what Romney was talking about when he was talking about the makers versus the takers.
Let me push this a little bit further here. And I think missing minutes, I like to know the missing minutes, because why do I suspect deep in my heart that there's more to that story? Whether we'll ever get to the truth of it, especially before the election, is irrelevant. But there's one where I want to see Romney on offense. I want to see him talking about the people that are in poverty, and explaining to him, this is where I think this is an opportunity. Explain how conservatism will help everybody in this country. That seems like an opening to me.
He did. If you watch the video, the full video, so-called full video that is on Mother Jones,
exist.
and I'm putting it in quotation marks, but people need to talk about what he actually said, because in my column today, which you can see on my site, I talk about what he was talking about before he made the 47% remark, and it got the biggest applause from that crowd, and it'll get the biggest applause from people who are actually able to hear the message. He related the story about how he defends himself on the campaign trail. It's just not getting told, and the most popular anecdote that he tells is the one that he heard from Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio's parents always told him when he was growing up, and they were very poor, that they were never taught to grievance monger about people who had more than them. They never told their children that they deserved a piece of anybody else's pie. They said, if you work hard enough, if you go to school, if you put your head down, you could achieve that too. And that was the message we heard from the Republican National Convention that was whitewashed by all of these media lapdogs and stenographers. It is the duty of people who work in new media and citizen journalists and people who want a new inhabitant of the empty chair in the White House in November to tell those stories that are being suppressed by these lapdogs who've whitewashed this radical past, who are overlooking the disastrous present, and who want to ensure a bankrupt future for America.
Total sellout
There is
media.
a way to push back. Don't despair. Yes,
right.
what you always say, let not your heart be troubled.
Well, it's not. This election has, the final sale's not been made yet. And people understand there's going to be a lot riding on these debates. There's going to be a lot riding on events that we cannot foresee as of this moment. Michelle Malkin, good to see you.
You bet. Take care.